Today we're going to talk about evaluating sources. In this conversation, we are going to cover how to critically evaluate sources, make sure that they're relevant for what we need them for, and also that they're credible. So that's what we're going over today. So in this in this slide, we can kind of see a spectrum. So there's lots of information out there that's available to us. So something we need to think about when we're going over this information is what side of this spectrum is it on? Is it very skeptical or much less skeptical? So can we trust it, or is it like we need to think about it before we decide we're going to include it as a resource? So far on the left-hand side of the slide, there's options or examples like blogs, personal websites, or websites of unknown origin. And what does this mean? This means basically, say you're looking up cognitive behavioral therapy, which is an interesting topic. There's plenty of blogs out there about cognitive behavioral therapy, but some of those blogs are not written by people who are actually experts in the field or authorities on the matter, so you have to be cautious. On the other hand, there could be a blog from, for example, Johns Hopkins Medical Center or Harvard Medical School that is a blog that is centered around cognitive behavioral therapy. That's a little different, right? Because it's coming from a resource that is more trusted than someone who's just some person who's posting a blog about what they think is right or wrong on the matter. So moving towards the right, we see publications from advocacy groups. So also, these can have great information sometimes, but it could be biased. So we have to be very cautious. For example, if you're looking at statistics on pregnancy and childbirth in the United States, if you go to an advocacy group that feels some sort of way about women's health care, or if you go to a different advocacy group that feels a different sort of way about women's health care, they may give you accurate information, but it's going to be biased and highlighted from the perspective of the group. And when we're writing academic papers or doing academic projects, we need to be unbiased. It is okay if we feel a certain way and our paper is explaining that perspective, but we need to make sure that we get sources that are neutral so that we seem neutral in relaying what we think or what we're trying to relay about the topic. So be cautious about bias. Then a little further to the right, we talk about daily news, print and online TV, radio, and general audience books. So here we're talking about things like someone who writes a book about, say, cognitive behavioral therapy, but maybe they're not licensed as a therapist, or maybe they're not an expert in the field. They're just someone who wants to talk about it. So we need to be cautious that if we're reading that book, if we want to source it for our paper or our project, we need to just be cautious that we're getting, we're choosing sources appropriately. Then in daily news, we all know that some news channels have some opinions that are a little different than some other news channels when it comes to some things that they cover and the way that they give the audience perspective on those things. So this isn't bad, right? It's okay. They can do that. This is the United States. But if we're using them as a resource, we want to make sure we're showing both sides of the coin, right? So just be cautious if you're using a news source that is potentially biased from one perspective or another. Then we go a little further to the right. So when we say high quality mainstream media, quality is relative, right? And that's a joke, kind of. So, okay, in our mainstream media today, we know there are some national newspapers, news magazines, and other kind of current affairs magazines that are well sourced. So, for example, you could use Time magazine as a resource as long as it's not an opinion piece. If it's a factual piece about something that's happening in the world, that's okay, because we know that they have accurate sourcing for their stuff. Also, like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, as long as those things are not opinion pieces, right, and you're writing from a factual article, those are okay for sources. Then, moving down towards the even less skeptical side of the spectrum, books by experts. So Non-academic publishers, so basically if someone is a psychologist and they're an expert in the field and they write a book, that's okay. It might not be published by an academic publisher, but we know from that person, like you can look them up and see, oh, okay, this person has been in the field doing this work for years and they have some expertise where they're speaking from. That's cool. Also, some government websites. So, for example, the National Institute of Health.gov. There's different health departments on a more a smaller level. So basically, some government websites are there and they're okay. Just make sure it's not like a politician's website because they may have information that's technically accurate, but it could also be biased, the way that they're presenting it. So moving all the way to the right, okay, peer-reviewed scholarly journals. This is what we want. This is what we want either the most of, or if we're only picking one way to get information, that works. Peer-reviewed scholarly journals. So what does peer-reviewed mean? Peer-reviewed means that it is, for example, say I write a paper about cognitive behavioral therapy, and I present it to a journal to be published. They don't just look me up and go, okay, yeah, she can write this, this is fine. They send it out to a whole bunch of people that would be considered my peers, and also to another tier or group of people that are kind of removed from the field, but still have a general understanding so that they know, like, they can tell if I sound crazy or if I sound like I'm making sense. So all of that group of people, it's kind of a committee, we could say a committee, they review my work and they pick it apart. They do my math. They should. They should be doing my math if I have statistics in my paper. They should be making sure that all of my information is accurate, it's put together well, it's good to go. And then the journal says, okay, you've been peer reviewed, we have some updates or changes or adjustments we want you to check on, and then you do that, and then you send it back again, and they go, okay, cool, we're going to publish you in this journal. So when we say peer-reviewed or scholarly journals, we're talking about going through like the TCC library or another academic library and looking for items that have specifically been peer-reviewed, knowing that what that means is that a group of experts has examined that work and determined that it's good, it's okay. Now, that being said, are mistakes made? Occasionally, yes. But we at least know if we're starting with something that's peer reviewed that it has been looked at by someone else and it is considered reputable. So there's that. Then books by experts or academic publishers, or also trade journals. I'm going to mention that also. So say you're doing a paper on the evolution of accounting, which you're probably not going to do in this class, but just as an example. If you decide that, or if you see there's a trade journal for accounting that's been publishing accounting papers and accounting information and accounting academic stuff for years and years and years. This is like a trade publication. It is just for them. That's okay. You can use that. That's considered usable because it is a trade publication put out by experts in that field. So hopefully this clears things up. So as we start to find sources for our project, it's okay to take some information from kind of the yellow or the orange or areas on this list. I just wouldn't take all my information from there. I would make absolutely sure that we're all including some peer-reviewed journals in our sources. So here we're going to talk about the main points we're looking over when we're trying to determine if a source is appropriate for our project. Because there's millions of sources out there that are academically reviewed or peer reviewed, and we don't need all of them, right? We only need the ones that work for us. So let's talk about that. So the three things we're going to go over are time frame, relevance, and authority. So for time frame, we want to look at when was the information created, published, or posted. And for us, what that means or what we want is within the last 5 years or so. For most instructors, that's just fine. Some will say 10 years, but I say go with 5, and then you're not going to have an issue. So published within the last 5 years. Then has the information been revised or updated? So say it was 5 years ago. Maybe you just read a bunch of stuff in the news about something changing on the topic. Maybe make sure that that is the most updated version of that information for you. Then, is the information current or out of date for your topic? So if your topic is something that is cutting edge, changing every 6 months, well, make sure you don't really want papers from 5 years ago, unless you're saying it used to be one way, right? And then current papers saying now it's this way. So make sure that if you're speaking on a topic that is moving very quickly, that you get the most relevant information possible. Okay, then relevance. So does this information relate to your topic? And maybe it relates to your topic, but does it relate to your research question? So a lot of times students will find, say they're doing a paper on how social work impacts different socioeconomic levels in communities. So there's tons of information on that out there. So maybe they find a few papers that talk about social work in general. Well, that's great. They could be great papers. But if they're not talking about access to social workers based on level of income in a community, like what is the availability, right? Then it might not be relevant for their topic. They might not want a paper that's just about social work in general. That being said, if they found a paper that talked about all the benefits of social work and how social workers being available in a community really benefit those people and give them kind of a leg up compared to other communities who don't have them available, well, that would be relevant, right? But if you find a paper that's about like the history of social work, well, perhaps that's not as relevant to your topic. So it like relates to your topic, but it's not relevant to your research question. Next, who is the intended audience? So when we look at this paper, and let's look at these two together. So who's the intended audience and who is the information, who is it written for, and is the information at an appropriate level that you can understand? Is it not too dumbed down, right, or not too fancy? So basically this would be, let's see, I'll give an example. When I was an undergrad, I did a paper on electrostimulation, deep brain stimulation for treatment-resistant depression. It was fascinating, but it was like so complicated for me to sort out all of the neuroscience connected to that topic. I was totally out of my league. I had to work really hard and try to sort out all this new vocabulary and all this more advanced stuff that perhaps had I thought about that in advance, I would have picked a different topic. Not that I didn't get there eventually, but I spent more hours than needed because I picked a topic where most of the publications were written at a level that was far beyond my general understanding at the time. So keep that in mind. When we're looking at our sources, we want to read the abstract. We want to read, which is like the first paragraph. We also want to read kind of the conclusions. We want to kind of get a good idea of what the paper is about. Don't just pick them based on title, because that might not be helpful to you. So be cautious, because you don't want to do all this work and find all these sources and then some of them are just not going to work for you. So when you pick them, please try to pick carefully. So, okay. Next part, have you looked at a variety of sources before determining that this one is for you? That goes to my previous point. So make sure you kind of keep an eye out. So look at the abstract for the paper. If you're like, I'm 50-50 on this, maybe it will help me, maybe it won't, just put it aside and keep looking a little bit and see if you find something else that pops out to you as like perfect for what you need. So don't go with like the first one that you find that you think might work, because sometimes students have a tendency to go with that source because they think it'll work and they're like just set on it, and really sometimes that's not, they're creating more work for themselves in forcing a source to kind of fit their needs. Other times, finding sources does give us an opportunity to narrow down our research question or direct it in a way that is more concise or more logical for like what we want to talk about. So we have to kind of use caution there. Then next, does it seem credible? Is it written by an authority? Is it like from a medical school? Is it from graduate students? Is it from doctors in the field? Who wrote it? Is it, although it's peer reviewed, is it information that is from people that are talking about it in the context that you want to talk about it? Make sure that that's true. And then think about it in general. Are you comfortable using this source for a research paper? Are you going to have to explain to me when I go, okay, why are you using this like nature's bounty website or something? I'm making this up, but why are you using this crazy nature website to talk about the benefits uh, of drug therapy, right? Like I think you need to go to the science side of that if you're going to talk about things that so things that may or may not work. So just be cautious. You want to be able to say, yes, I use this source and I'm confident about it. It's from this medical publication or these doctors or these people did this study. You want to feel confident about the sources that you put behind your work. Okay, lastly, the author. So who is the creator and author and publisher and source or sponsor? So what is the package of people that is presenting this work? So is there any information about the author's credentials or organizational affiliations? Is the writer an expert in the subject? What are their qualifications? So if is there contact information? Like obviously we don't need to contact them, but it is unhelpful if someone says, my name is, you know, Joe Smith, and then they don't say where they work, where they're from, they don't offer contact information, you can't figure out who the publisher really is, like it's listed, but you've never heard of them. So be mindful that the author and the publisher matter. Not that they have to be well known all over the planet, but is it someone with credentials? Are you reading a medical paper by someone written by someone who's not a doctor, right? So just use a little bit of common sense there. And if you're not sure, just ask. I will help you sort through it. There's lots of different fun ways we can pick apart these academic papers to make sure we know who we're getting our information from. So this acronym is called CRAP, or CRAAP, and it's kind of a funny word, and it's also helpful in remembering the things we have to think about when we're evaluating our sources. So these are all things that we just discussed, so I'm not going to read all of the blocks, but basically we want to think about currency. Is the information timely? Is everything in the paper, does it make sense? Does it feel like it's behind the times, or is it like, okay, no, this is cool? Then relevance. Is this information good for your paper, for your needs? If the information is wonderful, but you don't need it, it's not great. Just toss the source and go find another one. Then authority. Who is the source of the information? Who is the publisher? Then accuracy. The reliability, truthfulness, and correctness of the content. So are there statistics? Is there evidence? Has the information been retrieved or referenced from somewhere else? Are the sources of your source good, right? Do they have a bunch of citations? Can you check them? No, you don't have to check every citation, but if you're looking at an academic paper, at the end of that paper, there should be a list of multiple sources that those people used in building their work. So just make sure that that kind of exists. Then also, one last part about accuracy, does the language or tone seem biased and free of emotion? We may feel some sort of way about a topic, and also those authors might feel some sort of way about a topic, but their paper should be written from a neutral perspective. If you're reading this paper and you're getting the sense, wow, this person's super angry about this, then it might be biased. So they might be correct, right? Maybe they're fired up for a reason that is important and that resonates with you. That's cool, but they might not be being neutral. So just be aware. Then lastly, purpose. The reason the information exists. What is the purpose of this information? Basically, do the authors make their intentions clear? Usually that says that in the abstract. Like, we did this study to learn this thing. Cool. Alternatively, they might say maybe they're doing the appropriateness or the usefulness of electrolyte sports drinks for athletes. Well, make sure that you look at the bottom of that paper at the very end. They usually have disclosures and or conflict of interest statements. And normally it says there is no conflict of interest. There is nothing to disclose. I have no connection to whoever, right? But occasionally, say that sports drink study, maybe it was funded by Gatorade. That would be good information to have, right? Because Gatorade is not going to hire scientists that are going to say their drinks are bad, right? Makes sense. So just make sure that you check that conflict of interest um, area of the paper or disclosures to make sure that that's not going to be a problem. So just reviewing these main points because they are super important here. Currency is the timeliness of the information within the last 5 years is best. Sometimes longer is okay. If it is a historical reference, I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. If it's an original work from another decade, say for instance, Piaget's publications, he's a developmental psychologist. So what you might consider then is if you're writing about how Piaget built his body of information, you're probably going to need to use some of his publications, which are like way back. So they would definitely not be within 5 years. That's okay. If you're using them as a historical reference, that's fine. So relevance. Is the information important for what you're doing? Does it help you? Is it relevant to your assignment? Don't be afraid to toss it and pick a new source if you start reading and stressing out that you don't feel it's fitting what you need. Just get rid of it. I promise you there are more sources available. Then authority. Who is the source of the information? Is the source written by an expert in the field, a trade publication, a .gov website? So like health department information or government codes, things like that. If you need to reference those, .gov is okay. But otherwise, make sure, like we said, peer-reviewed, we want to go for that. Then accuracy. The reliability, truthfulness, and correctness of the content. Is it peer-reviewed? Does it come from a known trustworthy publisher or some shady publication? And you would know this because, for one, TCC is going to pick reputable publishers. So if you go through the TCC library, you're probably good. But just be careful, right? If it's published by Gatorade Sciences Inc., it's probably going to be biased towards Gatorade, right? As per my earlier example. Then purpose, the reason that the information exists. Was it published to convince someone of something? Is it published by a company or funded by a company who sells something related to the findings? Make sure you check the conflict of interest and disclosure statements. Then beware of pseudoscience. So basically fake science, right? Science, information pretending to be science. So some characteristics here would be a lack of rigorous scientific testing, a reliance on antecedent evidence, unfalsifiable claims, using vague or misleading language, or over-reliance on confirmation bias. So let's talk about a couple of those. Basically, scientific testing, we want to see some data in these papers. If they're presenting something as if the data isn't right, if they're talking about data, we want to see the numbers. Then reliance on antecedent evidence. So basically, if this is empirical information or not. And what empirical means is the people writing the paper did a study. It is okay to use some review studies that talk about a bunch of different empirical studies in one place. That's fine. But we want to make sure that like somewhere we're referencing empirical evidence. Then unfalsifiable claims. Well, what does that mean? Well, unfalsifiable means that you can't prove that they're right or they're wrong. So maybe they did a study and they don't give you the procedure they used, or they don't tell you exactly how they navigated getting their data. Well, that's a little bit shady because you technically should be able to read their paper and do their whole study over again just the way they did and be able to get your own results that should probably be a little similar to theirs. So unfalsifiable means they don't give enough information about their process to be able to let someone reproduce it on their own. Then over-reliance on confirmation bias. So basically, if you are reading a paper and it's from a scientist who is the person who created a treatment, well, they're going to say they're likely to say their treatment works, right? And maybe it does, but just make sure you use caution when you see that this paper is written by the people who created the thing, right? Or the paper is written by how Harvard testing is the best testing, but it's written by Harvard, right? You want to make sure that there's some neutrality there so that you're not just like believing everything at face value without doing a little research. So lastly, let's quickly review how do you know a source is suitable for academic assignments? Look for a date within the last 5 years. Is it peer reviewed? Are there citations for their sources? Is the information up to date? And is the analysis unbiased? Do they mention other perspectives on the issue? Authors should be experts on the topic. They may have advanced degrees in the field of the topic. It could be a scholarly publication like a university press, or bigger journals like Springer, Routledge, Gale, all of those. Are there citations, like we mentioned earlier? And then all statistics should be referenced, and anytime they're mentioning previous studies, those should be referenced. And citations should be to other scholarly sources. So lastly, the way that you can get to the TCC library, you can just go straight to their website. So directly from the TCC website, just click on the library links and get there that way. Or you can go through Canvas. From our class, you can click on Library and Tutoring Services, and then click on Find Articles and Videos, and then click on any of the search engines really, or databases. I put Academic Search Complete as a suggestion, but you don't have to use that one. They also have linked PsycInfo and I think PsycNet. Without looking, I'm not 100% sure by memory, but they've linked a couple of academic search engines right there in that portal. Then you can use the Boolean search engine to refine your search. And what is that? So basically that's where at the top of the screen you see 3 or 4 little blank entry fields where you can enter information. And what you can put in there is, say you're looking at cats as therapeutic measures for people who have depression, but you don't want to look at them from the context or the perspective of being service animals. You're like, just having a pet. Having a pet cat helps people with depression, right? Maybe that's what your research is about. So if that's the case, you would go to the Boolean search engine, and in the top one, you might say cats and mental health, not service animal. So those 3 little indicators on the left-hand side of those 3 search bars will allow you to say, yes, include this word, but no, don't include this one. So basically that Boolean search engine, it's a fancy name for basically a fancy advanced search box. So it may help you to narrow down the articles that you get back when you're looking for your sources. If you have questions about that, I believe I have a video about it, so I'll see if I can find that for you all, but just reach out and let me know. Also, I will go over it in class probably next week as we work on our first outlines. So that's it for this. Let me know if you have any questions. My office hours are available, and you can always email or reach out that way. Okay, thanks so much.